Actually, I think they looked at Wizard and said, "Hold my beer."
Definitely is like, hey, Wizards, hold my beer and watch this. Good time zone internet. Hello and welcome to Design Club Live, the only game design show on the internet that pinky promises, not to change the fee structure. I am your East Coast Design Club host. I got that right the first time. Don't worry about it. Will, joined as always by my pal Geoff. Say hi to the people, Geoff.
Hi to the people, Geoff. Hey, everybody. I am Geoffrey Zatkin. I am the studio director of Extra Credits and the game designer in residence, and full disclosure note, a dev who has built multiple games on the Unity game engine. So, just putting that out there, coming at you from the West Coast, joined by my East Coast pal, Will.
Hi, everyone. I'm Will. I've played an awful lot of games in Unity. I've helped developers fix some of the problems that streamers run into in their games in Unity. And I'm very passionate about this subject because it's really going to impact a lot of things in the industry. So today,
so many things that people aren't even thinking about yet, and we'll talk about we'll talk about a couple I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
But
first, we have to issue a very important disclaimer. We are recording this, okay? We don't normally do this. It's really important because this is an emerging and developing story. We are recording this on the 21st night of September. You're all now thinking the lyrics to the song. You're welcome. It is different song. It is 2:30 p.m.-ish Eastern time right now. So if anything changes between now and when this episode goes up, if you're watching it the day it goes up,
in about a week.
It is probably the 29th. That's our guess right now.
And this is just based on how we record, the day we record, and wanting to get something, because trying to do one next Thursday and get it out the day after is probably not going to happen. But we may cover this again next week, which means it would air the week after.
Right. So stay tuned to this channel for more. I don't know. Most of our takes are pretty tepid. I wouldn't say they're hot takes. It's more analytical dumpster diving. I think we're analytically dumpster diving into Unity to talk about what the heck is happening. All right, so Geoff, in brief, what did Unity do that's got and I'm checking my notes here that I've totally written on my hand, the entire gaming industry super mad at them?
No, wait, not the entire industry. I think Unreal and Godot and a couple others are eating popcorn on the sidelines.
That is fair. After all, it is one of my favorite tactical axioms: never interrupt your opponent when they are making a mistake. So that's very true. Unreal and Godot are just kind of passing the jump.
And many others.
Game Maker, Flash.
Lumberyard.
People would probably rather...
Amazon's actually wait, somebody might use Lumberyard. Yay!
Like 2 people get that. It's fine.
And I say that having several friends at Amazon who are part of that group. They would probably agree with me too.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
we'll remain anonymous for safety.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. But this is a really fast-moving story, and we're hopping on it because when was it last? Let's see. Today's Thursday. When did they announce this?
Last week, I believe it was a Monday or Tuesday.
Right, has it really been that short of or long? Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyway, fairly recently, Unity, a rather large game engine, and we'll talk about this in a second. Actually, let me say what they did, and then we'll get to why this is important.
Yeah.
Basically came into people and said, hey, you know what you're paying? That's about to change. And it's going to change 4 months from now. And it is going to change in a way that completely sabotages some ways that groups make money. And it's changing retroactively. And this is basically the equivalent of on how people thought of the pricing. Well, if you'd went out and bought a camera and you were taking pictures with it and you paid for the camera up front, and then Sony came, because it's a Sony camera, because I'm just picking that out of the blue, a couple of years later and said, oh, by the way, every picture you take, there's also a couple penny licensing fee for having used the camera that you paid for. Congratulations, that's going into effect soon. And you'd be like, wait, that wasn't the deal when I bought the camera.
Right. It's still my camera. I'm not necessarily using the most updated version of the firmware or the software, and I'm not getting any additional anything for
but
necessarily.
Even if you were,
Yeah.
I mean, just the high level thing is you basically purchased and used a thing under one agreement.
Yep.
The rules are getting changed to retroactively change how you monetarily interact with a thing that you paid for.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's so people are understandably.
And that's not the best analogy, but that's close enough. Basically, it said, hey, this game engine that a lot of people use, that you pay at certain levels a monthly fee per seat for. Per seat means per person using it. Because Unity has always been a pay up front engine with then nothing taken, no royalty structure on the back end. They came and said, hey, congratulations. We're updating this. There's still that upfront fee, but there is now a back end fee as well for every user that installs your game.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that too.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of confusion about that. So real quick, Geoff, if people haven't been paying attention to game dev in a really long time and have only watched sort of older school documentaries, is it relatively common for people to use an off-the-shelf engine now? Because when
let's talk about that.
Right?
Oh, by the way, from chat, actually, I think somebody corrected my analogy. Maybe it's 10 cents per person watching your photo would be more appropriate as opposed to every picture you take.
Yeah.
Yes, that is probably a better analogy than the one I said of photos taken. It was everybody who views my photo.
Yep.
Which is a thing I don't really have control over once I put the photo out.
That's correct. And we'll talk more about the problems that arise, and I have many examples that spring off of Geoff's photos. So who uses off-the-shelf engines?
So actually, let's even back up for a second. Unity's a game engine. So game engines are basically fundamental technology that are used to create games. They are kind of the central piece of technology that does everything from, at this point, almost everything from display to assets to just it is what you build your game on top of. And similar to a car without an engine, a game without an engine will not run. It is that fundamental to the construction of a game. And in a lot of cases, people used to make their own engines. Like my very first game a long time ago, EverQuest, we used an engine that somebody had been working on and then hired the person who'd been creating that engine and was licensing it out to come actually work in-house to finish the pieces of it for our game. Because at the time when we were doing this, there were not off-the-shelf engines readily available to buy. And so what this meant was a fundamental piece of technology for your game had to be built before you could build the rest of the game.
Right.
And what it also meant was development on the engine was happening while you were building the game. So for like the first 2 years of building EverQuest before it was out, the engine was getting built in parallel to us building the game. So this, for example, meant that our level editor, which went into the game engine, lacked a whole bunch of tools that a year and a half out that it had, say, 3 months before launch, or ability to import art assets, or all sorts of other things basically worked better the closer we were to launch because the tools had then been built.
Yes.
To get around all of this, Unity and a couple of other groups started basically selling off-the-shelf game engines you could go purchase. And what this meant was that instead of having to build it yourself, you could go build something that somebody had spent 2, 3, 5, 10, now almost 20 years working on, and not just a person, but an entire suite of people continuing to make the engine better, more tools, more streamlined, able to do more. And so one of the reasons that game development is significantly easier now on a lot of areas is that you're starting with a fundamental piece of technology that works much, much, much better than anything did 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago because of how much they've added to it. And Unity and Unreal are the two biggest engines in the video game industry. And at this point, unless you have a very specific need, you don't go build your own engine anymore.
Yeah.
You license an engine, and there are groups that build their own engines, but that is because they're building it for one specific game and they have a huge budget. And they can afford to basically spend a year or two before the rest of the team starts it to go build the engine that will be very specifically tailored to that one game or something like it.
Yep.
But final thing for that. This is also, engines are not easily swappable. Like, this is a big thing to know, that if you're using the Unity engine and say you're 2 years into development, it may literally be easier to restart your game from scratch than to try and transfer it. Actually, that is basically for most people what it would be. It's an amazing, and there are groups now looking on how to do better portability, but you cannot change your game engine in any stretch of the imagination easily. This is where it differs from the car analogy, where you might be able to lift a whole engine out and put a new one in.
Yeah, it don't work like that.
Doesn't happen.
Right.
Because again, fundamental piece of technology, everything's built on.
Yep.
And the big part for Unity is, at this point, I think, has been some numbers floating around, 70% of games released currently use the Unity engine.
Yep.
And so when we say, oh, go ahead.
And it's not just that that it's that engine, it's that there's an ecosystem built around that engine. And that's a fundamental part of what we're going to be talking about. But like, you can buy assets that are made for the Unity engine.
Right.
It's not just like, you don't get a box, right? This is sort of the interesting problem that happens. I don't know if anyone else has experienced this. You get a new device, you get a new phone, tablet, computer, console, whatever. And you're like, oh, that's cool. But it doesn't actually feel new, interesting. You can't do very much with it until you add all of the bells and whistles and add-ons that come with the ecosystem for that device. Your Switch out of the box doesn't do very much until you start downloading stuff from the eShop or put in a Switch cartridge or whatever. There's an ecosystem around that. And in the same way, there's an ecosystem around Unity that people rely on.
And the studios build that too. Like, you build your entire studio's development process around the engine you're using. You build in-house studio tools. You build, you hook up to your, Photoshop or your Illustrator or your Max or your Maya or, whatever it is you're creating assets, and everything goes through the pipeline for ingestion of art assets. I mean, so much stuff is built around this that it is literally fundamental to how a studio creates a game.
Yep.
And Unity has this position of leadership because they have aggressively gone after both school institutions and other groups, and they have priced their engine at a very, very low price, meaning that they've gained a tremendous amount of market share. And this has made them, again, unequivocally the most used game engine in the world. And so suddenly, when they came out last week and were like, hey, this thing that so many people in the game industry are using, and other places too, which we'll talk about in this. Actually, let's talk about it. This is used from AAA down to indie to mobile. It's on different platforms. One of the strengths of the Unity engine is that it lets you export to almost every place you could think a game would go. So, for example, when we were doing VR development, we were able to port to 8 different VR platforms. We could port off to PlayStation, and we could port to, the Xbox, we could port to PC, mobile, Android, iOS, just all of the different things. That is one of Unity's biggest strengths, is you can take your one core code base, and there are obviously differences on a per platform basis, but it allows you to handle those, bundle those into the main thing. And so what you're doing is you're building one version of your game that can go to lots of places, as opposed to having to build a version for the Xbox, a version for the PlayStation, a version for the Switch, a version for Android, for each one separately, which you would have to do if the engine did not have that capability.
And porting is tough without something like this, right? We've paid attention to many other studios in the past that have talked about the problems of getting things to port to different platforms. Even like very good double and AAA studios. Digital Extremes has had so many problems getting Warframe to work on all of the platforms ever, right? And they're a whole they're a big-ish studio, right, with a very popular free-to-play title. So
Anyway, all of these people use it. We've said it's around 70% is the number that's been floating around. Almost every video game school or school that teaches about video game development uses Unity as the thing that they teach students with, because they know it is so widely used in the industry that if you can put students out with the ability to use Unity, then that is their single best chance of getting hired in the game industry, because that is what so many studios use. And like, that's another big one. Like, there's a decade plus of like institutional set up in schools to teach people how to use Unity.
And that's sort of an Ouroboros, right? In a lot of ways, because so the industry continues to use it, both because it works, but also because they can expect that new people entering the workforce will know how to use that thing. So there's never any danger if you're using Unity as your primary game engine that you'll have to work extra hard to find a new hire who knows your game engine. They're just going to know it because that's what everyone teaches. And everyone teaches because that's what everyone uses. So it's kind of a cyclical, it's a bit
Unity,
of a cyclical
again, was
thing.
super smart on their pricing. And basically, if you're a student at a university, you can get a full copy of Unity for free.
Yeah, which is huge.
Which is, huge. This is a thing that, as a good example, most devs right now, I think it's $2,000 a seat for a standard license per year. So you're basically getting a $2,000 thing that people readily pay $2,000 for a year for free.
Yeah, I did want to look. I actually wanted to look that up because I wanted to figure it out. And
I think it was $2,040.
$2,040 per year per seat for Unity Pro. Unity Industry is $4,950 per year per seat, but that's
actually Industry gets us to the other thing. Unity has gotten so popular that they've also started targeting non-gaming divisions to use it, and that's actually what the Unity the Industry license is for non-gaming things.
Yep.
And good.
So worth noting, however, as well, that there is the student and personal version, which are both free. And that, like, if you go to their plans and pricing webpage, that those are still listed as free. However, interestingly, the parts of the pricing which they had declared were going to change on January 1st, 2024, that website doesn't exist anymore. It's just an apology.
Yep. And we'll get to that.
They know they've messed up. We should probably put that in here at this point. Unity is no longer unaware that they messed up. Yeah. Unity is now extremely aware that they messed up. Right. So
basically on the who uses Unity, and one of the things though that is worth contextualizing on that 70% number is while 70% of they're estimating games that get released use Unity, I would very much like to rein that in and say 70% of the revenue generated by games in the industry does not come from games running on Unity.
Absolutely.
Because Unity is basically free for a lot of indies and students and other things, it is very easy to put out, let's just say, a mediocre to poor game on Unity. This is the thing that everybody learns on. Everybody puts stuff out. Everybody the shovelware that goes into the iOS and Android stores of games. And I would guess 95% of those are Unity based.
And it's not even that. I would hazard a guess that the vast majority of the quick pivot that has happened into the bullet heaven survivor genre that was sort of spearheaded by Vampire Survivors and everything that sort of followed off of that, those very low cost, high install base, low margin games that have come out, I'm willing to bet that a large portion of that entire genre is written in Unity because it's easy to pivot quickly because you already have a bunch of people that know a flexible engine.
Oh yeah,
and can release on multiple platforms, right? As an example of something that's not like it's not all even shovelware. It's just sometimes lower margin stuff.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely. And I'm just saying though that and for some of the highest grossing games, those are built on custom engines.
Yeah. Every MMO. I don't think... Is there an MMO written in Unity? Can we think of one?
Unity and Unreal are both used for MMO development at this point.
Right, but like, what's a big successful MMO that's published using Unity? Is my thought.
I actually don't know the game engines for a lot of MMOs, but I do know that Unity supports MMO development. So I would be surprised if there's not a good number at this point.
Right.
I do not have enough knowledge to be able to say which ones were.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, cool. Chat saying Genshin or Temtem. Both good.
Sure. And there's a lot of games as a service that are built on Unity. And for a long time, Unity was basically viewed as the easier one to use that ports everywhere, where Unreal was the one with super high fidelity graphics and harder to use. Over time, Unity's graphics have gotten better and better, and Unreal has gotten easier and easier to use. So they've started to kind of push towards each other's bulwarks. But at this point, if you had to take a guess, super high fidelity, you go for Unreal. Kind of the thing that everybody knows how to use and is easier to develop in, you still go for Unity. And it's not just the engine. Unity has an entire ecosystem shop called the Unity Store, where people will go make code and assets and other things to put in there so you can buy them off the shelf and just use them right away in Unity. They are made to be used immediately and imported into Unity. Unity has a whole monetization system where if you need in-game ads or other things, Unity has a whole set of modules you can literally just drag and drop in. Unity has an analytics section. So Unity can serve basically almost other than distribution, like Unity, you'd still want it in the Steam store or the iOS store or something else. Literally every other thing Unity has a service for.
Yep.
And so full shop.
Yeah.
And that's one of the other things they've grown. So with all that said, that's kind of setting the stage for all of these people are using it. A lot of the people using it will just say, I'll just put this out there, probably run lower margins than on most of the other engines.
Right.
And suddenly,
their
one
margin
day,
got smaller.
this price change comes in. They're like, hey, here's a price change. It's retroactive and it goes into effect 4 months from now.
Yep. In fact, Geoff, do you want to maybe we pull
Let's
up
bring it up.
Yeah. Okay. So they released in a blog post this chart, which it may be kind of hard to read, and don't worry, that's not because of the size of the font. It's because it's hard to read. It's just hard to read in general.
Is there a way to zoom in on that, or
no? I also mean that like the information is poorly conveyed and it's a bad chart. But like, yeah. Okay. So the and no, I tried. If I
So this is a 2-part chart. So the first part is basically, when do you qualify to start paying extra fees?
Yep.
And what Unity said is basically, it depends on what kind of license you're using. So if you were using that free license, you need to have basically had more than 200,000 installs LTD, life to date.
Right.
Meaning if your game is 4 years old and you've done 50,000 units a year, I'm just throwing out some fun math, you would then be eligible for that part. The second part is in the last 12 months, and this is what's called rolling. So it's like last 12 months, next month it'll be the previous 12 months. So it just kind of keeps rolling along with you. You need to have earned at least $200,000 from the US top line. So for example, store fees count, or if you sell a game for $20 and you have to pay a couple dollars to Steam, they're counting it at $20, not counting the Steam, the part you have to pay to other people along the line.
This is gross revenue, not net revenue. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Which is, in this case, is kind of gross.
Yeah.
So that's basically so
I want to bring up something the chat brought up earlier, and we didn't have time to talk about it then. So one of the problems is that the revenue threshold over the last 12 months, that kind of makes sense, right? Because at some point this will be covered under the like that whole 12-month period will have been covered under this agreement. But that lifetime install thing, that counts all of the installs that weren't under this agreement. That counts all of the installs that the project or that the game had that weren't under this agreement. So if I was using Unity Pro and I had 1 million installs, I'm just over that already, and I didn't get to choose. I didn't consent to this pricing model, and now I'm
when
already
you went in and planned your game and the revenue and what it would cost you to make it into break even. And this was not part of the calculations because it did not exist. And that's one of the biggest reasons. There are many reasons Unity has lost trust on this, but one of the biggest ones is people budget out their games.
Yeah.
They're like, this is how much my employees cost. This is how much it costs to get healthcare. This is how much it costs to license all of the software. This is the, blah, blah, blah. They add that up and they look at how it's going to run and see, can they profitably make a game? This changes that.
It does.
Retroactively. And by the way, I would like to take a moment to read you their definition of installs because it's pretty marvelous.
Go for it. Yeah. Yep.
Are you ready for this, Will?
I'm so ready.
The installation and initialization of a game or an app on the end user's device, as well as distribution via streaming or web browsers, is considered an install. Games or apps with substantially similar content may be counted as one project, with installs aggregated to calculate a Unity runtime fee. What this means is...
I have a question. I have a question. Doesn't itch.io have an entire section where you can play games in browser, including Unity games?
Yes.
Does that mean that if I, as a person who enjoys browser games, boot up the same project every day for a work week during my lunch break, that would count as 5 installs?
The installation and initialization of a game or app on the end user's device, as well as distribution via streaming or a web browser, is considered an install.
Okay, so yes.
So fairly unclear, like they're not... And then they basically substantially similar content counts as one project. So this is, in other words, hey, if you have your game on 5 different platforms, that isn't 5 different games that get counted for installations. We add it together for one. Each game or app's cumulative install amount cannot be reset or reduced, even if it has been sold, transferred to a new party, changed its name, been republished as a new version, added expansion content, or had its unique identifier, example bundle ID, altered. Additionally, a change in publisher or distributor does not reset cumulative install count. Like they thought that part out really well. In other words, hey, this covers everything.
No, what? my entire thoughts on this are, huh? You thought that was a good idea? Like, okay, at this point, right? Even so and then
people read this.
Right, absolutely. And then I also want to point out that the cost difference, right? So we're going to assume so there's a whole thing with like the Unity Personal and Unity Plus section, which is that's free up front. So until you make $200,000 total
in the last year and have sold more than 200,000 units,
right,
you still pay nothing.
You still pay nothing, and then after that, it's 20 cents per install, which is a fair chunk, but...
And that's actually what the lower chart says, is based on which plan you're part of, how much money do you pay per install?
Correct. So 20 cents is the one for the free. Basically, nothing up front, but they're going to charge you a somewhat decent amount afterwards. Right. And if you're selling your game for $60, 20 cents is not a hugely onerous thing. Mm-hmm. But if you're distributing your game free, or many other methods where you're basically going for a very wide game that gets a little bit of money on a per install basis, 20 cents per install.
This looks very threatening.
Yeah. Okay. And then so that's the cost, right? It's somewhere between 20 and 1 cent per install once you've reached a bunch of different thresholds, and there's a cost.
Really quickly pointing out though, if you have one of the paid plans, you have to have made $1 million in the past year and have had more than 1 million installs life to date. So that's basically, if you have a game that you think is going to be selling decently well, they're like, hey, you should be paying us up front that $2,000 per person per month,
right,
to use the tools, but you'll then get a better pricing thing on the back end.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the whole idea, is that they want to charge some amount of money per installation once you've crossed this threshold, and that will have varying impacts on various developers none of whom, and we have to stress this is the problem. It's not the bottom line financial cost is unbearable to every developer or even to the majority of developers. We don't know. The problem is that none of them, 0% of developers, planned for this additional cost and we have no idea how tight their margins are to make a profit, to stay solvent, to make their next game, right?
And to be very fair, comparing this against, say, Unreal, which is the next biggest engine, Unreal just has a blanket 5% royalty fee.
Yeah.
So for every $1 million you make, you pay $50,000.
Right, and that's a really that's a huge difference, right? So let's talk about that really quick. I'm gonna take that chart off screen. There's a huge, massive ideological difference conceptually between a total percentage of revenue fee and an install and a per install fee, right? One of them allows for any way that the developer wants to make money, right? The developer says, we want to make money, and we think that the best way to do that is to make the game free to play with pay to turn off ads. And we're going to do ad support, and we're going to do a one-time fee that'll let you turn off ads in our game, and we think that that's the best way for us to make money. And Unreal says, that's cool. And Unity says, all right, you can do that, but because you've got a free-to-play game that's ad-supported, you're going to end up paying us per copy after a certain point, and that means that the developer is going to have to rethink their model, right? Because there's an additional burden in the Unity version that isn't present in the Unreal version. The Unreal version says, we don't care how you make money, just pay us a cut. And Unity says, nah, it's about the installs. That's what matters. And that's not, it feels weird and wrong.
And for some people, though, like, there's a good number of developers where the per install cost, as long as you're using the Unity Pro or Enterprise, it drops down to like 2 pennies to 1 penny per install at a certain rate.
Sure.
That may be radically cheaper for you than the 5%.
Sure.
But for other developers, this is the thing, it is not uniform. So it favors a certain kind of thing. And we're going to come back to this because we're basically saying this really hurts a certain kind of game.
Yep.
There's a really interesting caveat on that kind of game. Well, actually, I'm just going to jump to that right now.
Sure.
Because this is where some people start to think it gets a little diabolical. Okay, so what was it, about a couple years ago, Unity did not serve up ads in the same way that it does now.
Correct.
And there were two big groups, AppLovin and Iron
Mouse?
Forge?
Iron
Yeah,
Forge.
I think it's both of whom were doing kind of what Unity was doing, but looking to Iron Source. There we go.
There we go. Okay, words.
Yeah. And Unity ended up buying out Iron Source in a stock swap, even though AppLovin had come in and offered a much higher price to actually buy out Unity. But Unity wanted to stay non-acquired, and so went for the other one.
Sure.
Iron Source has some real industry around it because they were doing basically bundled malware installs as part of what they did. Like, there's some shadiness in the background around them. And the person who is running that is now one of the presidents at Unity after the acquisition. But yeah, just throwing that out there for a moment.
Right.
So Unity's had a couple years to bring them in, and they now offer ads. It is a better system than Unity had before. Who knows if it was worth the cost that they paid for Iron Source. But one of the big groups that could serve up ads into games is now part of Unity. There was some really fine print on this announcement that basically said, hey, if your game uses the Unity ad system, we may waive fees for it basically says, if you look at the pricing plans, it basically says, talk to your customer service representative. We may be willing to waive these fees if you're entirely part of the Unity ecosystem, specifically with the ads. So there's a lot of speculation that AppLovin, which is the group that wanted to buy them and is a major competitor, that this is basically how they're trying to force the entire freemium, free-to-play, or low-cost ecosystem onto using exclusively Unity ads and leaving AppLovin by basically saying you're going to be hit by huge fees, which we're happy to waive for you if you talk to us. So there's some real possibilities of that this was actually a play to put one of their major competitors out of business, done in such a way that basically devs would have to opt into this system.
Right. And there is another problem with the per install model, which Chad has been champing at the bit to talk about, and I have too.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to address this as well. There's no, as far as everyone's been able to tell, I have not heard of a way that Unity will be able to independently verify what a legitimate install of your game is. So
absolutely. Actually, so just real quick, there is the potential, just so everyone knows in this story, that this entire thing was done to monetize a group that wasn't paying much money and put a competitor out of business at the same time.
Yes.
That being said,
right.
So that's an interesting thing. I brought that ahead. But yes, back to installs. So, hey, cool. We're going to be charging you money on a per install basis.
Right.
And their language basically said, we're going to know who installs it and we're not going to tell you how we know.
And they tweeted this, by the way. This was in response to a tweet.
Yeah.
Their response was essentially, we will tell you how many installs your game has. And when asked to verify, they said, it's proprietary. You're just going to have to trust us. At which every developer went, what? Because, so there are a couple of concerns. Number one, if you have Unity call home the second it's installed before a customer, before an end user can consent to the call home, that's a GDPR violation. And the fines on GDPR violations are not small. They're actually pretty big. The second one is, and Chat also correctly pointed this out, if there's no differentiation made between a legitimate and illegitimate install, that means that companies will be paying for pirated copies that have been installed and then called home. Let's assume for the moment that Unity has some magical way to call home and accurately report the number of installs without violating multiple laws. I don't know what that is, but we're going to assume that they do.
Unity basically said, we're going to anonymize it all.
Yeah, it doesn't.
That was their answer. It's like, we're going to anonymize it all coming in and use it for aggregate reporting, which I don't know enough about GDPR reporting to know if that is actually something that would fly with that. But that was the one thing they said was, oh, it'll be anonymized. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sure. So then I totally believe that they could, would, and will do that. Okay. So then the other problem is, say someone, because this never happens, right? I'm sure this is like a corner case that would never happen. A company makes a game and it has a woman of color as the main character.
Low probability chance with the game industry, but becoming more common.
Right, yeah. And then super uncommon, right? Totally uncommon, that when a game comes out with a woman of color as the main character, right, nobody in the gaming industry or the gaming space gets it all completely bent out of shape over it, right? That never, ever happens. Oh, wait, it happens every time. So now those people who want to financially injure a developer who has made a decision that they don't like could, in theory, pirate the game, install it, and uninstall it thousands of times using a script.
Install bombing.
Install bomb it, and then cost the developer a bunch of money that the developer wasn't planning on because it's based on installs and not on sales. And according to the...
this could be for anybody for any grievance. Could theoretically do that.
Correct.
As if Unity can't track that.
Uh-huh.
And
right.
again, because they're not saying how it's done, everybody's assuming worst case scenario. That basically they're saying, we will have some way to track this. And excuse me, this was the initial things that they said. And again, so reasons game industry is upset. Thing everybody uses, large price change that changes business models, possibility of forcing them to use a new Unity thing as opposed to everything else, tracking how much gets paid in a way that is not transparent.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big run through there. And the worst part of all of this is that they bungled the messaging and were tone deaf on the initial responses.
Correct.
If there is a world where they could have announced this, said it's coming in the far future, given people time to transition, because remember, games are multi-year development cycles.
Yes.
So saying, hey, this kicks in 4 months from now,
right,
is unless you've just started a game or considering which engine to go in, it would be very hard for a game a couple years in to swap out.
Yes.
And to tell you how much this spooked people, not just the game industry, like I saw a couple of investors talk. He's like, hey, make sure to mention which engine you're using in your investment pitches because that now matters. Like, hey, you want to get your game greenlit and funded? Make sure to mention what engine you're using. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
Not
like,
Unity. Right.
Like,
yeah.
That's an interesting thing to say.
Correct.
And the response from this has been overwhelmingly negative.
Correct.
Like overwhelmingly negative. There's now a petition with, I think, 1,000 games, either games or game studios that have all turned off their Unity ads in protest of this, trying to do basically hit them on the bottom line where it hurts.
Yeah.
Any number of game studios have come out tweeting about this, including some that never do public tweets.
Like it's their first tweet ever.
Yeah.
Like,
to say how bad this is. And even game devs threatening to delete their games because they're afraid that this pricing structure will basically put them out of business.
Correct. And then Unity did what, in my humble opinion, as someone who talks a lot on the internet for funsies and for work, think was their biggest mistake, which is they went to the comments on Twitter, they went to the replies, and they started answering questions. And they talked to a bunch of journalists and gave journalists answers that appear to have been either half answers or incomplete answers, or they didn't, like, the answer is technically true, but for some segment of the population, or they didn't give a very well-worded answer, and it's all very confusing, and it made...
And just quick thoughts on this. I think the PR team was told to go handle it without getting given more information or a full set of information, and so they were like, well, you're telling us to do it, so we'll answer as best we can, and things did not go well on that front either.
Correct, because the correct response in this humble internet talkie person's opinion was shut up and say nothing. Right? I think that is so the first thing that they should have done was not do this with a 4-month time span, right? They should have done it multiple years out, and it should have been only games that are started with Unity development on January 1st, 2024 and later will have this applied to them, right? Because like I know...
Will, can I solve this?
Yeah.
Here, 20 seconds.
Okay.
You ready? Exact same thing they said. But hey, it starts a year from now, and there's a max cap at 4% revenue. Unreal does 5, or will do 4, so you're going to pay the lower of the two. You will either hit the 4% thing, or you're going to pay based on the install basis.
Yep. Done.
And it starts a year from now. Oh, and it's not retroactive.
Cool.
It will be only on things going forward.
Yeah. All right, cool. 20-second solution. So they could have done that.
They could have said that.
Right, but they didn't.
And they would have made more money.
Correct. And then the second thing that they should have done is not say anything. And companies need to embrace this. And the public doesn't always help with this, right? But the correct answer in this case was a boilerplate message that says, we hear your feedback, and we are sorry that our new revenue model does not meet with your expectations, and that we have irrevocably harmed your trust relationship with Unity as a product. Because
irrevocable is a good word.
It's a good word, right? Okay. And then we are preparing, we are examining all options and preparing more details about the way that we intend to proceed with this change in the way that Unity becomes solvent. We'll use the word solvent for the future, right? Please look forward to a live briefing by our CEO on this topic at some time in the near future. In the meantime, we urge you to issue all questions to this feedback form and then say nothing else, because
until they had a real answer. Because everything that they said that was spitballing was all bad, right? Because the biggest problem here, and I think we're really getting to the crux of the issue, is not the money, right? It's not about the money, chat. The biggest problem here is that now nobody trusts Unity anymore.
Wait, so Geoff,
and let me address that. Unity is a bedrock of the video game industry. And I want to get to why they're doing this in a second, and then their next kind of response. But Unity is a bedrock of the industry. We were saying 70% of games. It's in educational institutions. If you asked any game developer what language or what engine they've worked in, almost everybody will say Unity. Like Unity, while I won't say like pedestal beloved, is the thing that just the industry knew kind of had their back because it was a place you could go make a game that would port well, and it did everything good enough to be the best in class.
Yes.
Maybe they should have continued to increase development in some other places and do some other things. Like there's lots of things that they would have, could have, should have done. But when it all boiled down to it is, this was the de facto engine that people went to. They knew the pricing, they knew how it would work, they knew about the asset store and everything else. And suddenly the bedrock of the industry on that came and said, oh, we are pulling the rug out from the pricing model that, by the way, we said we'd never do. There's a EULA a couple of years ago basically pointing to that. And we are going to change it in such a way and in such a radical way in a short time period that it is almost impossible to think developers will ever regain the trust that they had in Unity, even if they walked it all back and just said, oops, things are going to be exactly as they were. Correct. The idea is now in people's brains that Unity could come try to do something like this at any time, and is run by a group of people that might once again try and do a thing like this. And it's not that there's other good options. Like, I want to throw out there's a lot of people saying, go to this, go to that. Like, none of them have the infrastructure built out or the training or the amount of studios and developers that know how to use them. Like, there is time to do slow switches over to things. But Unity was number one for a reason. And one of them is the reason that they're able to have gotten this, which is Unity basically got a venture backed. They had a whole bunch of money poured into them, which meant that they were able to, a whole bunch of tech companies like Facebook and Twitter and all these others were able to go out there and lose billions of dollars over time to gain market share. And they basically had the funds to go do that, to lose money, which meant other people competing against them to build those things, unless they also had the ability to go out and lose, hundreds of millions to billions of dollars per year to keep up with them, had a competitive disadvantage. So Unity got where it was because a whole bunch of groups dumped money into them to say, you are going to become the number one game engine out there, most used. So Unity was basically able to offer their services at below cost for a long time to gain market share. Unity went public 3 years ago, I think in 2020.
Sounds right.
It was either 2020 or 2018.
The Unity IPO was September 17th, 2020, almost 3 years ago to the day.
Okay, so it went public 3 years ago. And as a public company, eventually needs to get to the point where they can make money. And they have been raising revenue year over year for the past couple years. But if you look at their operating income, which is basically their income after operating expenses have been deducted, but before interest and taxes have been deducted, in 2020, they lost $250 million.
Yep.
In 2021, they lost $500 million.
That's the wrong direction, Geoff.
In 2022, they lost $880 million. So
more than $750 million.
Yeah, more than $750 million. They have been increasing revenue during these periods. But I mean, they've been going for huge growth, and the growth has cost them money. That even though their revenue, they had a 42% revenue increase in 2020, 43% in 2021, and 25% in 2022. So 25% revenue increase in 1 year is a substantive amount. But they've been spending so much basically gaining people and building out their stuff that they are losing a lot of money.
Yep.
And basically, the way that they are currently running their game engine is massively unprofitable. And at some point, that was going to have to change. Nobody can lose money forever.
Yeah.
And nobody should expect a group of tools they're using to lose money forever. But, and a big but, this is probably not going to solve their money problem. Like, I can see a board of people who are not game industry people going, oh, let's just put on, it's a solution imposed by a group who is not who does not know how their actual business operates.
Correct.
And this can be evidenced by the fact that we've seen a lot of Twitter of Unity employees leaving, basically saying, we tried to fight the good fight. Nobody was listening to us, so we're leaving.
Yep.
Like, they lost some fairly major internal Unity employees over this. So this was not a employee-led thing. This is very obviously, just based on how it's built,
right,
a top-down decision.
So I just want to clarify, by the way, that we already knew the second this happened that it was not gamers who did this, because gamers read gamer news. So if you had told me that twice in the same year, a major company who's a custodian of a thing that many people use to build their games out was going to change the monetization model for the way that they allow people to use their product to make games and distribute those games to other people, I would say that seemed incredibly unlikely, given that surely the second company would have learned from Wizards in the first place, but they didn't. Like, this is almost, this feels in many ways to me, as an observer of the gaming news, like somebody sort of mad-libbed out all of the proper nouns from the Wizards licensing. Actually,
I think they looked at Wizards and said, hold my beer.
Definitely is like, hey, Wizards, hold my beer and watch this. Like, because how else do you get here? Right?
I mean, you get here with a group that is not in touch with the people who actually use their game. And as Grass in chat just pointed out, they later put out something that said, oh, we think this will only affect 10% of our users. But people are A, questioning if that's actually true.
Right. And
B, it's that Unity basically came and changed something retroactively for people, and everybody's that got everybody really, really worried.
Right.
And, if you're playing Russian roulette with a gun that has one bullet in 10 slots, you still don't want to be that, one of the people that's getting the gun held up against your head.
Yeah,
that 1 in 10 chance is still
too high.
Not a happy outcome.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. The other big problem is that Unity's lack of I think one of the things that really damaged their case was how will we establish install base? And the answer is just trust us. Which is what their answer boiled down to, right? Was we're going to have they said a lot of fancy, very true corporate buzzwords, right? We have a proprietary method for determining the install base, and eventually it came back around to, we'll let you self-report, by the way, but that's...
Yeah. Actually, let's talk about some of the updates, because it has been an interesting week since. So basically, they came out with all of this. They came out with edge cases that were very much not thought out. It was actually the same way that when Wizards put out their initial thing, and all the people play D&D who are rules lawyers are like, wait, this would let you do this, this, and this.
Yeah.
And WotC, I think most of WotC looked and said, oh, we didn't actually think of that scenario. And the player base is like, yes, but we're rules lawyers. We immediately recognized it. I think Unity, high level, thought of a thing, didn't think it through, or part of their board or executive branch, whoever, thought of a thing, didn't think it through, put it out, and then realized it was going to be very bad for a lot of groups. And maybe that was by design. Again, like waiving the fees that might suddenly appear for your game if you switch to using the Unity ad engine is a very corporate sounding move on how to grow that part of the business and kick a rival in the face.
Yep.
It's honestly a brilliant move from that standpoint, but it hurts a lot of people along the way. And interestingly, their stock price hasn't really dropped because, as a lot of analysts have said, where else are people going to go? Right. It is not a thing where you can be like, I'm going to stop using this and start using this tomorrow. It is a weird...
There are some people who will do that. That is a very, before anyone in the comments is like, well, I'm going to... Yeah, sure, you are, right?
Yeah.
But...
a lot of groups can't.
Right. Any group that is small enough to make the emergency e-brake turn pivot into working into Godot is probably not a AAA studio, right? In fact,
or has just started their development,
right.
or yeah,
right. So like the joke has been going around is that Silksong will be delayed another 5 years while they take it off of Unity and put it on Godot, which I would be here for if Team Cherry really thought that was a thing. They've still got my money for when Silksong comes out, but I think that they're probably the most influential group that is still small enough to do it, and I don't think they will. Right?
So they did go out and clarify a couple things. They basically said, hey, we're not going to be charging for reinstalls. That was not in the spirit
that's good.
of it. The spirit of this program has always been to charge for the first install, and we have no desire to charge the same person for ongoing installs. That's for if a user reinstalls or redownloads a game.
So why use the word install then?
However, do installs of the same game by the same user across multiple devices count as different installs? And the answer is yes. We treat different devices as installs. So if you delete it and undelete it from your PC 5 times,
that's fine.
Still one install. But if you put it on your PC and your Steam Deck, that is 2 installs. So better, not great. Let's see. Basically, beta games don't count, nor do demos, unless that's basically an upgradable one. So like if your beta turns into the full game, that does count. But if it's a standalone demo that goes away, that doesn't count against it. They got rid of they clarified, no, we will not charge for charities. And so if you were giving away, games for charity or on Humble or something, that would not suddenly cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. They say they're going to be able to detect fraudulent installs. Again, just kind of reading through. The runtime fee does not apply to WebGL games. So this doesn't affect WebGL and streamed games.
Okay.
So that, hey, I played it streaming over on itch.io is no longer a thing.
Okay.
They also clarified, let's see, are these fees going to apply to games that have been out for years? So if you meet the threshold for 2 years ago, do you start owing money for installs immediately? And they basically said the installs count retroactively, but you will only be charged for people who install after January 1st. In other words, if you've sold 500,000 copies before, you're eligible on that part, but the only ones you pay for are people who are with the start of the new year when this plan goes into effect. So if you sell another 10,000 copies, you're only getting charged for those, not for everything before you.
Okay.
Which was that was a scenario people were fearing could have been hit with the retroactive thing.
The new one's still not great, to be honest, but it's better.
It's significantly better.
Oh, it's better. It's not like, please don't get me wrong. Better, yes. Yeah. Great, no. Yeah, by the way, chat's correctly pointing out, if you are able to determine whether a thing has been installed multiple times on the same device, that means you need a device ID. Guess what that's against?
Oh, I'm not saying they can do this. Going through to read some of the clarifications that make this less worse than it initially was.
Correct. And I totally get that. And
again,
I absolutely...
less worse.
Yeah, less worse. Some parts, still bad, right? It's funny. I just want to point out that the fact that they've had all of this time, and again, they could have invested in Will's patented PR technology. Shut up and say nothing. But they didn't. And now they're saying things that are on the surface impossible or illegal. Your choice, right?
Yeah. And again, this is just looking at the situation as it's come out. So most of these clarifications came out a couple days after their initial version of it. And we do know that this time, while they're discussing it, so currently on their website, they've taken all of this down.
Correct. The fee pricing page says, I'll actually pull it up. That's fun. We hear you and we're sorry. We're updating the runtime fee and we'll be sharing a new FAQ outlining the details in the next few days. We appreciate your patience, period. That's the website. There's like header and footer and stuff, but that's the body of the website, is that statement. That's it. Good. Perfect.
What you should have done earlier.
Should have done that way earlier.
A couple things that exacerbated this along the way before we get to other fun bits. On the don't say things, when one group was asking about charities, I think as Chad had brought up again, I think they said that both, what was it, Planned Parenthood and one other group didn't count it, who used their engine. I'm not sure how, but good on them for using it. Don't count as charities. Which, yeah, immediately set off some, wait, you get to pick who's a charity? It isn't just a 501c organization? Like, that's not good.
Whoever made that statement,
yes,
should have been fired.
Oh, children's hospitals. Snackin just
children's hospitals. Oh,
yeah, CS
great.
Mod. We work with CS Mod. They're good people.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So whoever made that statement should have been fired, because that is one of the very few ways. Like, I am a creative person. I can think of a lot of ways to make things worse. I am a creative person who works on the internet. I can make a lot of things worse very quickly. I am struggling to think of a way that you could make things in this situation worse than by saying, yeah, we're going to choose charities we don't like. Yeah, like Planned Parenthood and children's hospitals, and they don't count as charities in our view because they don't. That you made it worse. That's a new record. That's a new, astounding, amazing. They have done incredible work in making things worse. Fired. Should have been fired publicly, immediately. Was not. Again, say nothing.
Yeah, like that seems particular. And the other one is, they went through, let's see, was it GitHub that they...
I think it was GitHub. Yeah, they removed a whole bunch of their information from GitHub.
Yeah. So GitHub, which used to have their EULA and other things basically saying, hey, you don't have to upgrade to a new version. You can keep using the old one under whatever the old things are. They went and quietly pulled that from GitHub, hoping nobody would notice. Though, of course, people had backed up copies of it.
Also, yes, GitHub, the version tracking, the change tracking public repository of information. Surely no one will notice if I make a change on an information repository on GitHub. Like, that's not the point of GitHub.
Yeah, I'm trying to find out a whole article on it. But basically, removing that to hope people wouldn't be able to reference the thing that says you can keep using the old versions if you want to. Well, they removed the entire repository history and all.
Yeah, they were okay. So from yeah, but, again, that's not going to go unnoticed. Like, I hope no one notices we pull an entire repository from GitHub is not exactly a winning strategy. Again, not a person who's ever run a tech company, not a person who's got a degree in PR. You could have handed me $50 and I would have done a better job of this than what you've done here, Unity. Just so we're clear. Compelling. I could provide compelling evidence. I could have run a better PR campaign for this move than for $50 that begins with "don't." Right? Like,
yeah.
Anyway.
But yeah, so one of the many other reasons that people were less inclined to trust them on this entire thing was, it wasn't just the bad messaging, and it was bad messaging. It wasn't the bad follow-up. It wasn't, let's go kick sick puppies and children. It was also, hey, let's, delete an entire repository that had, listings of older things that said we wouldn't do this, so maybe you won't notice. It's just like they found ways to compound this on their messaging. And even if they'd come in with the best of intentions, like, let's give them benefit of the doubt that they came in with the best of intentions thinking this was actually a good thing. The way they set up to message it bungled it so badly that even if this had been the best of intentions, they still would have had to be walking this back. And we can tell from the things that they did that this wasn't the best of intentions, and from people leaving Unity and from the industry response. But so they put up that big, hey, okay, let's cool off. We're reassessing part. We've heard rumblings about people saying there's big talks going on inside at very high levels. They've apparently been calling in a good number of partner developers this time to say, what if we did this, to actually show them plans beforehand and get feedback before just putting it out there. And there have been a little bit of leakage around that. And current rumor mill is that they are going to put the thing I'd basically said, which is, hey, let's put a, royalty fee cap on it. So rumor is there is actually going to be the 4% royalty fee. And I promise I had that number before I actually read the news. I think I told it to Will a couple of days ago that it's like, hey, this is how I'd fix it.
Yeah.
I'd put a royalty fee that's 1% under Unreal. And that would at least be something people could contextualize and live with.
Yep.
Upping it from the $200,000 to $1 million. So basically, the rumors for their new one are, instead of the $200,000 threshold, it's going to be $1 million for people who use the engine before paying. They're raising that to $1 million, and they're going to limit it to a 4% revenue cap, so a percent under what Unreal is doing.
Right. Now, those are good rumors, right?
Yes.
Rumors. But let's hope that those rumors have some follow through. There's another problem, which Geoff and I aren't sure what the actual impact is going to be. But as someone who has worked in and around in academia and around academics for a while, academics don't do anything quickly. Generally speaking, they don't. They take a very long time.
They move on a semester to yearly basis.
That is
because
correct.
That's how their institutions are set up.
That's correct. They move glacially, and they're often very far behind, which is why course curriculums are often very far behind the real world. However,
and to be fair, you don't want your instructor changing your curriculum in the middle of you getting taught it, most likely.
Correct.
It's like, oh, you know that stuff we studied 2 months ago? Not actually appropriate for what's coming up on your final exam.
Right, yeah. And there are lots of good reasons for that. However, there have been discussions going around that many colleges and universities that offer degrees in game design are starting to think about moving some distance, unknown how far that distance is, away from Unity as their primary, as the totality of their course load, right?
And Will and I have different readings of this.
Yeah, right. So Geoff, what's your reading on this whole concept?
And so we should report that this is in a Rami Ismail. I can never say his name correctly, even though I've met him before.
Yeah, he's great.
Super nice guy.
He's been doing a lot of interviews about this with Drop Frames, and he's been talking to other people, and he's got a whole thread on Twitter.
Yeah, and a lot of educational institutions is saying that for the first time pretty much ever, he's getting pinged by a lot of them saying, should we teach a thing other than Unity?
Right.
And he said that his answer has been actually no. That for the moment, at least, Unity is still the thing that will get students hired coming out of universities, because that is still the major thing that games use, and also that there isn't anything else.
Right.
Like, sure, you could go teach all of your kids Godot, but the percent of the industry that uses that and that will probably be using that in the next couple years is minuscule. That's not preparing them to go out and immediately get a job in the game industry.
And that's the Ouroboros that we were talking about before, right? People expect there to be new hires who know Unity, and people teach new hires Unity because they expect there to be jobs that need Unity, right? So it's two halves of the same circle, right?
And so because of that, and the honest thing is, Unreal is harder to learn and is not used for as many games. And that, Unity is still the number one thing out there. And so I think a lot of university professors were amazingly spooked, especially the ones that have been in game industry, to say, are we training up our students on a thing that is no longer going to be the thing they need to know?
Yep.
And that's because of the speed they move at. So my guess is, and he said, maybe teach a course or two on engine agnostic development, but still go learn Unity. That is still the messaging, because everybody knows Unity. And as people move to other things, they're going to be this is why I think it's not going to change soon. There are going to be whole pipelines, Will, set up to teach people how to transition from Unity to a new thing, if that becomes the thing, new onboarding processes.
Yep.
So knowing Unity will still be the thing. They're like, cool, we know where your skill level is. Here, we know how to transition you from here to the new thing we're using.
I guarantee you that the first engine that releases an add-on that changes their menu system and hotkeys to be Unity system menus and hotkeys will have a major advantage.
I wonder if that's copyrightable, because that's...
Ooh, good question.
Because that's actually... Like, you can't copyright process, but you can copyright, like, UI and interface.
Sure, so maybe they won't do that, but, like, Premiere has a feature where you can import the hotkey style of other the default hotkey style of other applications. So, like...
but that's there's probably some creative ways around it.
Right.
But anyway, just throwing out there that... But anyway, it is a really interesting thing, because literally every educational institution teaches Unity because of how prevalent it is.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to change anytime soon at the speed they move, but for the first time ever, they're thinking about it.
I think the thinking about it is going to cause... So, okay, this is this feels like signaling in like any like Spades or Bridge or anything like that, right? Like any contract like bidding thing where there's two halves of the same team that aren't allowed to directly talk, because they're not allowed to directly talk for a whole bunch of reasons. This feels like signaling to me. This feels like we're willing to teach not this if you use not this, because this doesn't seem great for a thing that we're going to be teaching students, right? So this feels like the opening signal in, hey, games industry, you want to use something else as the default for 70% of all games that are released? We're down. You just got to tell us what.
Right.
Right.
But that also means they're going to follow. Like, the universities aren't going to lead it. The universities aren't going to train people up on a new set of engines that nobody uses, because that would keep their students from getting hired.
I absolutely agree.
They're thinking about it, which had up until 2 weeks ago wasn't even a thing anybody would have considered.
Yes. And the fact that they're already willing to say, hey, we understand that there may be an industry pivot and we're down to follow that is a very, in my mind.
And that shows you how egregious Unity was.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. On that, we agree. The fact that universities are doing anything a week in shows that Unity egregiously messed up. Yeah. Like, the degree to which you have to mess up for universities at the beginning of a semester, because there's still more or less the beginning of the fall semester.
Can you get Richard's comment?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. You made the snails panic. Exactly. Yes, that is correct. Yes. Right. I've met many professors who still teach classes the same way they taught classes before I was born, because that's how the class is taught by Thunder. Like, that's how the class is taught. And for them to, in 1 week, be like, hey, maybe we teach something else, is like,
And this really shows you the possibility of repercussions, because here's Geoff putting on his prognostication hat. Do I have it? I put all my hats. Where's a hat?
No. The bit's taking too long. These are the goggles of prognostication.
There we go.
Proceed.
Oh, I mirrored. Damn it.
Proceed.
Okay. Unity, both the founder and the current CEO have both publicly said, we effed up, with the founder saying it even more explicitly than Riccatello did.
Sure.
They are going to come back with something that is definitely better than it was.
Sure.
There is going to be a change, however.
Mm-hmm.
But my guess is, based on how embedded the world is in Unity, that it will be good enough. Like, I think we may see Unity drop from maybe 70% to 60% over time. But I think the Unity ecosystem, if they can come back with good enough, is so entrenched in the game industry that, as the Wall Street analysts were saying, where else are they going to go?
Yeah.
We're not going to have new things appearing immediately. Like Godot has been waiting for this. I just had to be able to get that in once.
That's a joke, Cat.
As has Unreal and many other groups.
Yeah.
But they have good things, but they don't have the penetration that Unity does.
Correct.
Just straight up. And they're not necessarily built to be the mainstream engine that can do everything the way that Unity is. So, but it is. We are going to see fundamental changes on how people think about engines because they're worried about Unity and have lost the trust, even if they all stick with it for now.
Correct. I think, building on what Geoff just said, that this is the beginning of Godot's villain arc.
Villain arc?
villain arc. This is the part in, if this were a movie, right, where we smash cut to Godot in a basement by a single bare bulb on like with like a blueprint, like a blue page on a big artist's or drafting table, right? Like sketching out their master plan. They're like, yes, those fools, they've let me in. Ah! And like, I think eventually we'll see Godot begin to take more market share, because I do think that it isn't there yet. I think it has the I think one of the things that they were waiting for was an opening. Right? They were waiting for an opening in the industry to emerge and for more people to be willing to change from Unity, because up until now, there's been no reason. Why would you try and make a new product when 70% of the industry is already very happy with the product they have,
and is happy enough
and isn't going to change, right? Now there's an impetus for change, and they are now happy enough for now with the product that they have. And I think,
guess they're going to double their market share. They're going to go from like 0.0, like they're below 1% market share.
Sure.
Like they were going to see, and this again is the hard part, when you're going against a group that basically could operate at, hundreds of millions of dollars of loss for multiple years to build up market share and tools and everything else and build up an ecosystem around them. That's hard to come in and disrupt or displace.
Yep.
Like Unity has the unfair in the actual economic sense of it, in that they have a superior product, so they have an unfair advantage.
Yep.
Not in that what they did was unfair. They did it according to the rules of capitalism, which works in certain ways. And I'm usually fairly pro on that. In this case, though, it has resulted in something that was really good up until the management running it decided that maybe actually kind of like something that used to be a bird. Or, I mean, we've seen a couple of interesting cases.
This is the year of burn down established mediums for conversation and development in favor of profit. Yeah, it has been that.
But yeah, like this problem of trust, even if people keep using it, is made people consider a thing that basically they just never considered before. Unity 2 weeks ago was always going to be the good game engine that you could go use to do projects. And you knew what you were going to pay because they'd been doing that for a long time. They had solid pricing plans. You could agree or disagree with them, but you knew how to budget that in. You knew how to build around it. You knew everybody had to use it, blah, blah, blah. That people now have a different idea in their mind and they can't unthink it.
I think that's exactly right. I think that is exactly right. Well, Janet, Brad, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation on Unity and lack
Which we
thereof.
have no opinions of.
Yeah, no, definitely no opinions expressed here. Totally not. Did we miss something? Do you think there's some nefarious thing that's happening? How do you think this is all going to turn out?
The answer to that is yes.
Well, right, yeah, but chat, it's called baiting engagement, Geoff. I mean, leave a comment below to help feed the algorithm and tell them that you'd like to see more of this.
And if you want to see us discuss this live and join in with the conversation, we stream every Thursday morning at 11 Pacific, 1 a.m. East, 1 p.m.
2
p.m. Eastern.
2, Geoff. It's 11
3-hour time
or 2.
Let's try that again. We stream every Thursday at 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern.
There we go.
Boom.
Right. You can join us here at twitch.tv/extra credits. And I'm on 5 days a week. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll keep you posted. There may be another episode on this, or there will be a different episode next week. Who knows? Either way, we'll see you then. Bye, everybody.